So, Yom Tov of Shavuos, Zman Matan Teiraseinu is around the corner. Right now is the last Seder before Yom Tov. So, of course, as kollel yungeleit, there should be a special connection to this time, to this Yom Tov, since all of our activity, all of our energy is invested in learning. Now, in the last few days, happens that you might have seen the following headline. The certain politician in Israel in the current coalition was quoted as saying, kollel yungeleit, you know, these kollel yungeleit, they come in the morning, they eat a sandwich, they drink some coffee, they talk politics, then they open the books for a bit and they go home. Anybody here identify with that? No, it's unheard of in this kollel. But no, we don't necessarily have to react to every item and to every headline. It's upsetting to see that everything has to become politicized, which is tied into how things work generally there without, I'm not going to get into that. But in the last few days, it was suggested to me that maybe we should respond in some way. So I thought, maybe we can respond in Shiur form, in the form of a Shiur. Because if we're already responding, it's more appropriate to respond in a Torah degoifen and not in a political fashion. And anyway, if we did, then we'll kind of prove him right, because we would be talking politics. So let's respond the way we work, and let's address this from a Torah perspective. This is also connected, of course, to Hilchos Talmud Torah, which you've been learning at Rambam very recently, last few days. So I thought we'll talk about the Rambam's famous shitta against being supported for learning. I already mentioned it, already alluded to it recently. We were talking about the Rashbatz and the Anusim, and I mentioned that I was in the context of Rashbatz's life story, that it was in this context of defending, explaining why he ended up getting paid to be a Rav in North Africa. And I said, maybe this is worthy of a shiur of its own, and here now it worked out. And hopefully from reviewing this inyan, we'll know what the response is to, obviously, assuming we're not sitting and drinking coffee, but we're learning. We'll see what the response is to the argument that is it really appropriate for people to be paid to sit and learn. Now, it's a somewhat well-known topic, and it's especially well-known because the way the Rambam writes it, mamish sounds and looks like he's almost reacting to the way things are today. It's, as we'll see, it's written very critically, very biting fashion. But I don't know if it's such a bavusta sugya in Chabad, because the truth is we don't actually have the kollel framework in the sense that most other communities have it, especially in Eretz Yisrael. I even saw somebody blamed Chabad for this whole episode, that, he must have heard the sprach from Chabad. It's all our fault somehow. But, so it's kedai. We should also be familiar, though, with the sugya. And we'll have to keep it short, but we'll see if we can reach any insights in addition to seeing what the Rambam actually says. So we'll start with what we learned recently in Rambam, Hilchos Talmud Torah, in the middle of Parag Gimel. The Rambam says, Kol ha-mesim al liba sheyasik b'Torah v'lo yasem malacha. Not going to work. How's he going to live? Yisparnas min tzedakah, harei ze chilul es Hashem, ubiza es ha-Torah, v'kibo me'er hadas, v'godam ro la'atzmai, v'notel chayev min ha'olam haba. Sounds like he doesn't like it. If I can tell what he's saying. So very strong words, very harsh words from the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah. You're not having enough from Divrei Torah. Amru Chachamim, Kol Hanenem Divrei Torah Notel Chayev Min Ha'olam. And starts quoting lines from Pirkei Avos. V'oitziu v'amru le'isasem ha'Torah lisgadol behem le'kardim lachber behem. V'oitziu v'amru aheves ha'malachos no'as ha'rabonos v'chol Torah she'enim ha'malachos seifa b'teila. And ultimately, this guy is going to be robbing people. It's not sustainable. Okay, so that's what it says in Hilchos Talmud Torah. Pretty sharp. If you look in his Pirush to Pirkei Avos, Perek Daled, where some of these Mishnayos are, goes at much greater length and even sharper and in a deeply personal manner, essentially. And of course, this type of discussion is based and built on looking through the picture of, we go through all the Chazals, what do Chazal have to say, how do they acknowledge this question. So that's essentially the nature of the discussion, like most in Yanim and Halacha. For the purposes here, not that I'm reading the text, but I'm using Kapach's translation. So in the Mishnah, Leisasim HaTorah Lizgadu B'hem, Leikardim Lechel Mehem, this is the Girsa here, Ha Kol Haneyes Medivri Torah Natal Chayiv Min Ha'olam. So the Rambam says, really, I didn't even want to talk about this Mishnah, because it's so clear, it's so obvious. The other reason not to talk about it would be because I know that Reiv Gedolei HaTorah are not going to like what I'm about to say. V'ulei af kulam. Maybe it's literally just me, the Rambam says, and everyone else is going to dislike what I have to say. But I'm going to say it, and I'm not going to pay attention. I don't care, not who came before me, not who's around now. I'm going to say my piece. So the Rambam says, this Mishnah, Al Tasas Katera Kardim Lachbarba, you're using it as a shovel, whatever the appropriate tool is, you're sort of using it as a tool. So that means don't use it, don't think, this is my path to Parnasa. And it says, it explains, that's why you shouldn't use it as a kardim, because if you do, you're in deep trouble. So, how could you argue with enough in a Mishnah? So people, they're blinded, the Mishnah is so clear, they ignore it, they threw it away, and they have pshatlach that they don't understand themselves. And they've established power and rights for themselves. There's a whole system in place to take money from individuals and from kehillas, and you have to pay a Torah tax to the Torah elite. And they've lulled all of society into thinking that this is a good thing. And that's good to zach, you're supposed to help chachamim, talmidim, people that are involved in Torah, Torasam Umnasam. This is all a mistake, he says. There was no Yesod in Torah, nothing to stand on. If we follow the footsteps of the chachamim, we'll see they never collected money from people. They never had fundraisers and were collecting the Dovis for the big yeshivas, and not for the Rosh Galias, and not for the Dayanim, and not for the Marbitei Torah, and not for anybody else in that ecosystem. If you look through Chazal, you'll see some of them didn't have Parnasa, some of them were very wealthy, but that was from their own Parnasa, from whatever occupation they had. Chalila to say that was simply because people were stingy and weren't donating. Absolutely not. If that person, those Chacham that are described as being poor, if they had just stuck their hand out, surely they would have been showered in gold and jewels, but they didn't do it. Instead, they found a job, whether it was a good job or not, and they were loath to take from other people, because Torah says not to. He starts mentioning examples. We know Hillel chopped wood, and he was learning in front of Shmai Vavtalion, and he was very poor, and we know how great he was. Considering how great he was, don't you think that if he would ask for money, people would have given him? They wouldn't have let him chop wood. Hananya ben Daisa, that's the name as he writes it. Hananya ben Daisa, kollel kulei and nizin ela b'shvil Hananya b'ni. Yet Hananya himself eats a kav charuvin me'erev Shabbos, light of Shabbos. So we're all living in his merit, but he himself doesn't have what to live from. And he never asked anybody for anything. Karna was a dayan in Eretz Yisrael, and he used to draw water. He was a shoy of mayim. And in Ksubas it says that when the people wanted Avodah Torah, he would say, either find someone to do my job for me, or pay me to stop working so I can hear you out. So that's the picture the Rambam is trying to paint from looking through Chazal and seeing that all these Tanoim had occupations. They weren't living off of the public. And again, you can't say the Yidden then were just cruel and they weren't doing chesed. If that was the problem, you should have found Chazal condemning the people that are so stingy that are not supporting Torah. You would expect to find that, but you don't find that. They were Chasidim, Aminei ha'emes, l'shem ha'emes, Maminim ba'Hashem v'Torah Moshe Rabbeinu. And this is what Torah says, so they wouldn't permit themselves, they wouldn't allow themselves to take it. They saw it as a chil Hashem in the eyes of the public. If Torah is just another job like any other job, it causes a zilzal. And that would be Dvar Hashem Biza. So all the people that deny this, they're just denying the truth, they're denying the obvious, and they're taking money from people, whether willingly or against their will. They found the Ma'is in Chazal about people that took money. Those people in Chazal, they were invalids. They actually couldn't work, or they were elderly. They were already at a stage where they couldn't work. So if you have taka of nothing, then what should they do? Should they die? That's, then Torah says it's fine. So you see this, Rabbi Elazar ben Reb Shimon, he doesn't say the name, it's Rabbi Elazar ben Reb Shimon above Mitzvah, that there were sailors that thought their ship was going to capsize. They pledged they're going to give money to Rabbi Elazar ben Reb Shimon, and the marriage should save them. They were saved, and they came and they gave him the money, and he said, he accepted it. Oh, see, it sounds like he accepted it. He was a Balmum, because we know from elsewhere in Gemara that Rabbi Elazar ben Reb Shimon had health issues. But if you have the ability to earn a living, you would have no excuse. Does Rav Yosef used to schlep heavy wood, heavy beams, and he would say, oh wow, you get to work and it gets your body warmed, so that's good. And that's what made him happy. That's what he took comfort in. And he was happy with what he had. He says, there's some fools that say, it says in Brachas, you want to enjoy, you want to live off people, you could be like Elisha, you don't want to, you could be like Shmuel. Shmuel famously insisted on not taking anything. Elisha, we find, did take from people. There's no comparison, he says. It's complete, you're completely being completely misleading. There's no room for mistake here. Elisha wasn't going around taking money from people. Certainly wasn't imposing and collecting money. Chalila. He was accepting a kibbutz, which means that if he's traveling on the road and he needs a place to stay and someone takes him in and gives him kavod in that particular fashion and context, that's fine. And Shmuel didn't even do that. So that's what Chazal are saying. That's what Rambam is saying. It's not like, it doesn't mean Elisha took money. It means Elisha, we find that Elisha stayed in this one's house and that one's house. That type of thing. And Shmuel wouldn't even do that. So Chazal are saying, you want to accept like Elisha, you could do that, when you're traveling. And if you want to be like Shmuel and be extra for frumt even in this prat, so then that's also good. Because there are other Makaitis that say Talmid Chacham Amar B'Sudasa is not a good thing. Kol Sudish Ein Shal Mitzvah, Talmid Chacham shouldn't participate in, which we also covered in Rambam recently. Hilchos Deis. You see that Torah Deis. Why should I even go on at length? And then he tells the story at great length of Reb Tarfon. Meaning, no, he's saying I don't have to say anything. The stories speak for themselves. And he goes into Arichas, the Meister Reb Tarfon, that Reb Tarfon was suspected of being the robber, and he was trapped in the sack, and the guy was about to kill him, and finally he whispered something about Tarfon, and the guy chapzich, it's Reb Tarfon, and then Reb Tarfon felt so guilty that he had used the Torah to be saved. And Chazal says, so what should he have done? Chazal said, well, Tarfon was wealthy, so he should have just pleaded, I'll give you money if you stop hurting me. You see here, Reb Tarfon didn't even want to use his name that way. He regretted that he did. You have the other Ma'aseh, Rabbeinu HaKadosh was feeding people during a famine, and then Yenis ben Amram came, and he didn't want to say that he's a Talmud, so he said, Parnaseini kekela v'ko'erev, even if I'm a nobody, you should still feed me. And Rabbi gave to him, and then Rabbi regretted that he gave to him, and then Talmidim said, isn't that Rabbi Yenis ben Amram? Isn't he one of your Talmidim? And he didn't want to have enough from Torah. So you see, these are the stories that the Rambam holds up as examples of paragons of what Chazal have in mind. He says, these two stories, they silence everyone. They silence all debate. There's nothing left to debate. And the Rambam concludes and says, the thing that Torah is matir is to give money to someone else as an investment, and that person is dealing with your investment for you, and then that way he's supporting the limit in some sense, and then he gets schar, and that's what Chazal mentioned, matil malai lakis talmid chacham. There it sounds like you are giving the talmid chacham money. So pshat is, the Rambam says that it's in a financial arrangement where you gave them money. Another thing you could do for Talmid Chacham is to give them preference. In the market, you sell a Talmid Chacham's schayra first. Why? Why is that different? Because these are schuyas that Hashem gave them, just like the Kohen gets, Levi gets. It's not like the Torah doesn't hold of giving any matanas in any context. So If you do it in a Torah away. And these two particular things are things that Sachrim might do with each other. Sachrim take each other's investments, and Sachrim sometimes might decide, hey, let's honor so-and-so, let's give him the first chance to sell. So a Talmid Chacham could be treated like a choshev businessman. That's appropriate. Also, Talmid Chacham are exempt from all kinds of debts and financial obligations, Magbius, Arnunius, Misim, different taxes and collections, even the head tax or a wall tax. And even if the Talmid Chacham is very wealthy, he is exempt, and he mentions, not very often that he mentions his history, he says that Rabbana Yosef Halevi Zatzal, the Rimi Gash, as we know him, said in Spain, Paskin in Spain, that there was a guy, a Talmid Chacham, that had vineyards, gardens, the Guinness of the Kramim, that were worth thousands of dinarim, but he's still exempt from being collected from because he was a Talmid Chacham. Even if poor people are paying it, and he's rich, he's not paying it. That's a din, that's a Torah din. Just like Kahanim don't have to pay Machzis HaShekel. That's the Rambam at length in Pirush HaMishnayos. Now, as I mentioned before and last time, so the big bar plukta, the big response to the Rambam comes from the Rashbatz, whose details we got into already last time. And as we'll see, he casts a wider net. He brings even more Amorei Chazal into the picture. He doesn't seem to directly take on the Rambam, but it's very clear from the context that he's building a competing case. So he begins by talking about, you could pay the Malamed. Why can you pay the Malamed money? So Chazal say, because the Malamed does something extra that he doesn't have to do. Just like the Kehanim, they do extra things for people, and that could be the reason why they can take schar. Let's look into the pratim right now. These are all their own sugyas. The Dayan can take schar batala. Maybe taka similarly from that story with Karna, that he said, you want me to paskin, you want me to hear your din Torah, so you have to pay me to take a break. But b'chlalos, it says in the Mishnah, lei kardim lachbar behem, d'shtamish b'taga chalaf. So clearly, to see in Chazal, you're not supposed to stam live off Torah, take enough from Torah. Talmid Chacham can have his schayra sold first, he can be exempt from different taxes, etc. Here it quotes the Rambam. The Rambam brought the story from the Rimi Gash. The Chacham is allowed to stand up for himself. He's allowed to say, by the way, please don't collect from me, I'm a Talmid Chacham. Yalocha zor v'lei picha. Even though usually we say Yalocha zor v'lei picha, you shouldn't be praising yourself, allow someone else to do it. But it says in Gemara Nedarim, Shadi leilat tzurva merabanan lameimar tzurva merabanan anov v'lo yihivna karga. You're allowed to say, I'm a tzurva merabanan, I don't pay this tax. Talmid Chacham was also allowed to take gifts, presents from Balabatim, because just like an Amoritz, a choshev, a random person also takes matanas. So Talmid Chacham shouldn't be different. So that's the pshat. He says in Brachas, Haretz Lehanis Yohanek Elisha, who accepted the achsanya from the Shunamis. It was a Chovid Kaifen. If you want to be machmir, you can be machmir like Shmuel. He took his kishon beisa, he took his house along with him wherever he went. If people want to invite him to their meal, they want to feel, there's a Talmid Chacham at my meal. That's the celebrity that they want to have. That's also good. Reb Zayda used to eat by the Reish Galusa. That's not having hanah from Torah, that's kvoida shel Torah. He's making a distinction between neyos from Torah and kvoida shel Torah. This is a distinction that he uses throughout. He mentioned some of these, but we'll see that the Rashbat has a somewhat broader definition, as we'll see. Because, as we'll see, derech kavod. How do you define derech kavod? What do you consider to be kavod, or what do you not consider to be kavod? So if you're mechabed chachamim with your money, you have a great schar, and if it was also for them to take it, so why would it be? Why would we say, so you got schar for being machti to the Talmid Chacham? It says, Mahana Talmid Chacham min chasav, v'lasas le pragmatia. So you see this idea of using your money to assist the Talmid Chacham. Atam adveikim, it's an edge, atam adveikim Hashem lekechem, v'chiyav shel adam shedavek b'shchina, zeh mahana Talmid Chacham min chasav. So you see these Memorei Chazal about being mahana Talmid Chacham from your possessions. Kol amalta malay lekis Talmid Chachamim. Tamid Chacham Zeich V'Yeshav B'Yeshiva Shel Mayla. HaMakriv Doiden L'Tamid Chacham Kilu Makriv Bikurim. Haretz L'Nasach Yayin Agab Mizbeach Yimali Greinim Shel Tamid Chachamim Yayin. A lot of more Chazal that seem to have a more positive attitude towards being Mahana Talmid Chacham. And if the Talmid Chacham is sick, then he could take even bigger matanas, and that's the Ma'aser with the Blazer B'Reb Shimon, who took a lot of money from them because he was unwell. And that's not Neyes Medivrei Torah. What about Reb Tarfon? He brings the whole Ma'aser with Reb Tarfon. So Sai Taki could have used his money like Chazal say. Outside. That's he could have talked like Chazal say. He could have used his money. So Ibazoi to use his name Taka in that context would be like Neyes B'Divrei Torah. That's not Derech Kavod. That's just using Torah to save yourself. So the story appears with different variations in Chazal and Maseches Kala and in Yerushalmi Shvius. In Yerushalmi Shvius it says that the guards caught him and they were beating him. And when he saw that he's in a sakana, he said, maybe let Tarfon's family know to prepare tachrichim for him. That was the hint that he gave. They heard that, they fell on their faces, they said, Rabbi, Sharilan, forgive us. So he said, every time you hit me, I was meichel you for the previous time that you hit me. Now, so this, he says, from this, the way the story is told here, Mamish sounds like it was Tesafes Chassidus. Why should he be meichel them? It was his to eat. So it's, feed these other Gersois, it's B'chlal Midas Chassidus. Mentions the Meister with Rabbi, with the Oitzres. Says that was all Darkei Chassidus, right? So the stories that the Rambam is holding up as once you hear these stories, there's nothing left to debate. So Rashpatz is turning them more into Darkei Chassidus. This wouldn't be considered Neyes B'Divrei Torah. Neyes B'Divrei Torah is using Torah for your advantage. This is just Darkei Chassidus that they were trying to avoid using their name in any way. And if it was a problem, then why was Rabbi Doch announced he's giving only to Tamid Chachamim? If having Hana in this way is a problem, then Rabbi's being Machti everybody. Why is everyone else taking it? Just Rabbi Ben Amram has a problem over here. That man, that Rabbi Ben Amram is doing Darkei Chassidus, and everyone else is doing the normal thing. And if the Talmid Chacham is a parnas al tzibur, then he certainly, if he has a position, he's providing a service, so then certainly he could take mammon, and they're chayav to give him. And he was zeicher a kisra shel Torah, and he points out, he says, the Mishnah says two things are bad: learning Torah for kavod and learning Torah for money. No, does that mean that a Rav is not allowed to get any kavods? No, you're not supposed to learn for the kavod. The kavod comes to you at some point. Seif a kavod lavai. So the money is the same thing. You shouldn't learn for money. You shouldn't be trying to get money. But at some point the money comes. That's fine. And he starts bringing many more Mamar Chazal and Gemara Chulin. It says that a bag of money came to the base medrash and Ma'ami took it. And they said, "V'nasan lakayim. Why'd you take it for yourself?" He said, "Adam chashav shayni. Hakayin hagadol miyachav gadleyu mishalachiv." Which I guess is being used here for an Adam Chashav. Another Ma'aser, Pinchas Hasatos, he was can't think of the word, but he was cutting stones, stone cutter, and they wanted to turn him into the Kohen Gadol. They found that this was his job, so they filled the whole mine that he was mining. They filled it with gold coins. So if a Kohen Gadol is able to, you do this for a Kohen Gadol, to megadol him, me'achav ha'kohenim, so kol sheken the Talmid Chacham chashav. The Talmid Chacham is greater than a Kohen Gadol hanichlas lefnai v'lefnim. In Saita, it says that Rabbi Bo saw that Rabbi Abba ben Akai, Bali Chayvis were going after him, and he said, actually, you know what? He's greater than me. You have a new Rav. Hire him as your Rav. So the context here, and he was an Anav, and he was an Usher, so he could afford to pass it over to him. But you see, he was helping him in a financial, the moment that he becomes the Rav, then his financial problems go away. And Gesechas Gittin mentions that there was a Shipura by Yehuda's place, and by Rabbi, and by Abai, and by Rava. What's a Shipura? So he says it's a Tshuva from Rabbeinu Shiur Goin that says a Shipura is a shofar is a pushka. So you see, there was a pushka, and they were collecting money for the yeshiva. You see this in Gemara, and that's how Rashi explains the shofar there as well. The famous Ma'aseh in Tainus, Rabbi Yochanan and Ilfa. Ilfa went to do Schayra, Rabbi Yochanan stayed in Torah. In the end, Rabbi Yochanan became the Rosh Yeshiva. And Rashi writes, "Hashivu b'yeshiva Rosh Aleim Anastum le'mamin." And then he had money. And then he was able to come back and tell Ilfa, you thought you wanted money. If you just would have stuck it out, maybe you were even greater than me. This money could have been yours. Another Ma'aseh, Gamliel and Rabbi Yeshua, and he was criticizing, he was giving Musar to them, Gamliel. There are two Talmidim, Beyabasha, Rabbi Elazar ben Chisman, Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgada. They can tell you how many drops of water there are in the ocean. They don't have what to eat. And when Gamliel heard this, and they were on a ship, he got off the ship. Heshivim baroish le'espainis me'at tzibur, as Rashi explains. Right? So the idea was, you should have known, you should be supporting Gamliel, you should be supporting the Adamet Talmid Chacham, you should give them an oifen to be mispainis, derech kavod me'at tzibur. He brings more and more midrashim in this fashion. There's a Tanchuma, he calls it Yilamdenu, Tanchuma Tetzaveh. Someone was going to Yerushalayim, and Yerushalayim they realized he's an Adam Gadol. They said, "Toil chamishim zehuvim v'shevet slena, take 50 gold pieces and stay with us." And even the famous Mishnah in Perek Vav, the Brisa of Kinyan Torah and Pirkei Avos, Rabbi, Ritzayin Choshetadid Imanu will give you Kasav Azav. What did he say? I don't want to live in a place that's not a Makim Torah. That was his answer. He didn't say, "Hey, I'm not to take the money." Sounds like it was normal. It was okay. The money part wasn't the red flag here. So kollel ha'maisim nira, that Adam chashuv and the tzibur needs him, he could take the money, and it's kavod Torah, and it's not haneis midivrei Torah. Shezehu kavod shel Torah. Einoi mishtamesh ba, avul hu mishamesh oisa. That's his phrasing here. All the other ones at the end. What about all the Tanoim that did have jobs? That was medakei chassidus, or before they made it big. Doesn't say clearly here, but maybe elsewhere, the hill, Ma'aseh Hill, that he was a woodcutter. The whole Ma'aseh is that he was a small Talmud, they didn't let him in, he was there starting out. Rambam is bringing about how Hill was considered so great later. Who says he was still a woodcutter? It doesn't say that. So Rosh would argue that it's Punkt Fakert. But there's no Isser. And then he gets to the biographical part that I quoted last time, we don't have time to repeat it again, that he ultimately started off with a job in Spain, but then in North Africa there was no job, he lost all his money, so that's why he was matir, and all the Gedolim before him already did it, and he wrote a tshuva about it, the tshuvas are printed in Tashbetz, and that's that. We don't have time to get into the tshuvas here. Of course, the discussion continued afterwards, the Kesef Mishnah over here, Dafka reacts to the Rambam. People point out that's unusual. Usually the Kesef Mishnah is here to Namzachon for the Rambam. Here he tackles the Rambam. And B'derech Klal, when you look around, when people talk about this, so usually the way it's presented is that based on all the other poskim and based on what we've seen, it's been done for over 1,000 years, etc. So that's it. The Rambam said what he said. No, we do otherwise. That's it. The question to me is if there's still any room left within the Rambam itself to understand that maybe it depends on the situation, and it's not completely completely negative. I don't think I'm the first one to suggest this, but this is my thought process in going into this shiur. So first I was thinking to myself, what about Yisachar Zvulun? It doesn't seem like the Rambam, and not the Rashbat, at least here in Pirkei Avos, although the Tshuva he does seem to mention, they didn't mention in what we covered so far. So I saw there's a sefer, came out a few years ago, Derech HaMelech from someone. He's going through this inyan, quotes the Rambam later in Perek Gimel, he asks, before you told me that the second you're living off Torah, you're evil. Now you're telling me, to be misparnas, so where's the middle? What's the middle ground? He quotes the Igros Moshe, the famous Igros Moshe that people quote when they talk about this. Moshe said that the Rambam's whole vart was only, the Rambam says, one of the places that work for a few hours, and when you finish working, then you'll be able to learn Torah. So if that works for you, it's ein zach, but if either you can't work for that amount of time and still live off it, or you can't learn enough Torah that you need to learn if you're working. So Moshe says, Avada, even the Rambam would be made that it's probably okay. The Sefer says, a little shver to say that in the Rambam, Iker Chasam in a Sefer. So then he says, maybe Yisachar and Zvulun. Gets into the whole Yisachar and Zvulun arrangement. It's a topic that I touched on when we spoke at the Kolel had a dinner in El. So I touched on some of the discussion in halacha about this. But then even he is made at the end that the Ram doesn't mention Yisachar and Zvulun anywhere in Mishnah Torah. So it sounds like maybe the Ram didn't hold of that either. And he goes on. Then I saw that there's a Yarchon HaOtzar, Otzar Chachma, has a forum, and the people on the forum have a publication they put out every month or so. Their essays, their writing. So someone a year or two ago wrote a whole article about Yisachar Zvulun, really breaking it down, every shita and how the idea developed from generation to generation. A very, very in detail article. I think I looked at it and used it a little bit in preparation before I spoke at that dinner. And he actually has a section there talking about the Tashbitz, because the Tashbitz in the Tshuva does talk about it a little bit. So he points out, he says that he's focusing on Yisachar and Zvulun. He points out that Ram doesn't mention it. And he points out that, what did we say in the Pirush HaMishnah? He said, Hadavar shitirato yatoidel tamid hachachamim hu sheyitnu mois la'adam, this investment arrangement. So, Zaktar, it almost sounds like that's l'chayra the Ram's Havana in Yisachar and Zvulun. Yisachar and Zvulun isn't stam giving money. You have to have a keren, you have to have your own money, your own seed money, and then the other person works with it. And that, of course, stems with the famous question, not the famous question, but it's an obvious question. If you know the Rambam's biography, so we know that originally the Rambam had a brother. And the brother ran the family business. And the Rambam didn't work. And then the brother was at sea and he drowned. This is a letter the Rambam writes to Rabbi Yafas Hadayan. It's printed in Igros HaRambam. And he describes how devastated, how distraught he was when this happened, that his brother drowned at sea, lost the whole family fortune. And then he had to go to work. You know what's pshat? So, Kanirim has been zagen that the Rambam held that no, this is the family money, this is the family fortune. He's handling the finances, but it's my money as well. The question is, even this doesn't really get stated clearly in Mishnah Torah. He mentions it in Pirush HaMishnayos, as we said. So that's would seemingly be what the Rambam has to say about Yisachar and Zvulun. Now really, if we had the time, it would be geschmack maybe to go through the Rambam and the Rashbatz and really be mad. There's many different Eifane Hano over here, many different scenarios and situations and Eifanim and how you're getting Hano from Torah. It would be interesting to be magdir them and to go through the Chilukim. But just going through the Pirush HaMishnayos, just not going into the Shiur, so even though he uses words and language of Nenem Divrei Torah, which makes it sound like it's a problem be'etzem, but between the lines it sounds more like the Rambam's real problem is Chil Hashem. That there's something just very not b'chavadik about the situation as he saw it, as he witnessed it, and this was something that he was reacting to. The way the Chacham are taking, or the way they're imposing on them, and the way Torah ends up being viewed as just another job. So it sounds like maybe there is a little room to say that it's not so bad be'etzem, and maybe because, as we see, he was reacting to something, so maybe he was going to the other extreme a little bit, but really, there is room somewhere in the middle for it to be okay. And if it's done taka, if objectively we would say it's b'chavadik, like the Rashbat said, if the equivalent scenario, you would do it even for a not a Talmud Chacham, right? The Rambam limited only to investing and selling schayra first. But let's expand that a little bit. Maybe there are other things where everyone would agree that it's pretty b'chavadik. And how will the Rambam explain all the other chazals that the Rashbat's found? Just give me 2 more minutes. Kavod Shavuos. We don't really have time for this. Interestingly, today you have people that are known as Rambamisten, right? People that there's different levels and dimensions to it, but in part they take issue with how halacha or Haredi culture has developed, and they want to return to the Rambam's psak, the Rambam's shita, the Rambam's hashkafa. One of the big names is Rav Kapach from Taimon, belonged to a small sect in Taimon that rejected Kabbalah and Pnimius HaTorah and very much sticking to the Rambam. And Allah pratim, so you'd expect, and they don't seem to get along with Haredim so well either, you'd expect that they would be trumpeting this Rambam. But there's a book that came out, Misorali Yosef, sort of So number of volumes have come out in memory of, in honor of Yosef Kapach's heritage. So Mesorli Yosef Chelik Zayin is a lengthy piece there about what they did in Taimon, and towards the end he says that Rav Kapach would tell you that look at universities, look at professors, scholars, society as we know it today is mechabed scholars in their field, and you do get full financial support or partial financial support. So you see that it is a covet in society. So why should Torah be any different? They bring a shayla. Someone asked him in Tafshin Samach towards the end of his life. Aram says in Hilchos Talmud Torah, but the Tashav, the Rashbats, and the Kesef Mishnah, Sefer Kert, can Talmid Yeshiva get tzedakah? So Kabach said, what you take from Yeshiva, that's not connected to the Rambam. There, the Loimid is mamish imposing tax on Balabatim, or the Reish Kollel is doing, but if the Medina, the Misrad Datot is giving money, and they're giving it to those who study all kinds of things, so no different. So interesting that was actually his take on it. In 1 more minute. So I would say, Lamaskana, that I would see room to argue that the Mashal HaKerli and Raman, Rama was talking about someone maybe who, long term, his plan for life is, I'm not going to do anything else, which is the criticism you hear about other communities, which is not something that we actually do. Befrat, Yeshiva Bacher, everyone seems to agree that a Yeshiva Bacher is not at a stage yet where he's making money. And the Rambam describes when you get married, you should already have a job and property and a house. That's not how we're operating over here. So just like a Yeshiva Bacher is not working yet, so a younger man, a few years before he starts working, why should that be any different, Lamashal? As long as it's done in a bechavadik way, and especially if it's Yisachar Zvulandik way, even if that's not quite how the Rambam presented it, but if that's how the person really feels, and it's coming from the Zvulun, not from the Yisachar didn't go around, so maybe it's not okay. So the Maskana, either, like we said, plenty of poskim just say that we don't go with the Rambam, but even if the Rambam, it's done properly, and it's not Chil Hashem, and there's no, the Mekatrigem can't say, oh, you're coming and drinking coffee and you're talking politics, you're talking sitting and learning. So Zicher, it's a Gavadik Azach, and that's the Kveda Shal Torah. Kabbalah Shal Torah, B'simchu B'pnimius.